Good morning, everyone. If you'll please take your seats, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us back for day 2 of the Virginia Education Summit. I'm really thrilled to invite Secretary Laura Novi, a member of our Hunt Institute Board of Directors, to start us off with some greetings this morning. Secretary.
Good morning, and thank you, Allison. Welcome again to the second day of the summit. As Allison mentioned, my name is Laura Novi, and for people who are confused by my name tag, Secretary Novi, I served as Secretary of Education under Governor Bob McDonnell. So glad to be here, and I'm also very honored to be a part of the Board of Directors of the Hunt Institute, and very proud of the impact that they make across the nation. I would like to thank Senator Hashmi and Delegate Rasool for their work in convening this group. I think it's tremendously important that we get together in advance of the session and have an opportunity to discuss some of the issues that we'll be confronting. I think it was mentioned that this is our 10th summit that we've had in Virginia, and a big thank you to Delegate Landis. How many folks remember that name? Yep. Quite a few. Former education chair, and he was our first partner with the Education Summit 10 years ago in Charlottesville, Virginia. We actually started with the House, and then we didn't have a chair of Senate Education and Health at the time. And so started with one body, and then the next year we brought in the Senate. And I thought it was also important for you to know that these convenings occur in a number of states across the nation, and a lot of that's because of the good work in Virginia. The Hunt Institute has been able to expand to Missouri, Ohio, Oklahoma, West Virginia, North Dakota, and Illinois. And so really excited about the work that the Hunt Institute has been able to expand. I would like to give a commercial, and I know Scott Braband did this earlier this morning, but wanted to give a commercial and a shout out to the issue brief that you each received. It's got great information about Virginia, but also has some comparisons and some policy questions to think about as we're tackling some of these challenging issues. We had a very engaging day yesterday with reminders of the important work that this group and your predecessors have advanced in Virginia. We talked about early childhood quality and access, teacher retention, strengthening our principal pipeline and school accountability, in addition to strengthening college and career readiness. We recognize this work is ongoing, but these convenings are key to coming together for the good of the Commonwealth, our students, and families. I'd like to thank everyone who's here today, who's made this summit possible. Thank you to our resource experts and moderators, and thanks to you for being here, as we know you deeply care about Virginia students. And please join me in a round of applause for the Hunt Institute team, Javaid, Allison, and all their team for the great work that they've done in putting this convening together. Today, we will focus our conversations on preparing Virginia students for higher education, adult learners, and school funding. And to start off today's program, I'd like to introduce Senator Mamie Locke, Delegate Sam Rasool, and Chris Duncombe with the Education Commission of the States, as they will provide a policy update on the work that's going on with the Joint Subcommittee to study elementary and secondary funding. Senator Locke, I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As many of you know, in July of 2023, JLARC released a report that reviewed Virginia's K-12 funding formula. It included a comprehensive review of our K-12 education funding formula and provided recommendations on how to better fund our schools. In response, the General Assembly created the Joint Subcommittee on Elementary and Secondary Education Funding to review the JLARC report and determine how we can improve our funding formula. The subcommittee includes 5 members from the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee and 5 members from the House Appropriations Committee. I serve as the current chair of the subcommittee, and I am joined today by our vice chair, Delegate Rasool. We've held our first meeting in September and heard updates on actions that the General Assembly has taken since the report was released, including over $1.2 billion added for teacher salaries, reading specialists, support positions, and funding for students placed at risk and English language learners. We also learned about other state processes of reviewing and updating K-12 education formulas from national experts. One important thing we found is that complex changes to a formula can take time. We have 2 more meetings scheduled this year. Our next meeting is on October 31st, and we'll meet again on December 9th. Our goal for these meetings is to identify additional near-term recommendations to General Assembly to consider for the 2025 session. At this time, I'll ask Delegate Rasul to provide some remarks and introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Senator Locke. As you mentioned, given the complex nature of Virginia's funding formula and the number of recommendations provided by JLARC's landmark report, we expect this to continue well beyond this year. After the 2025 session, we plan to begin looking at the long-term recommendations and funding structure options in the report. Today, we are joined by Chris Duncombe from the Education Commission of the States. Chris, I know that ECS has compiled a variety of comparisons and been able to bring us some good information as we begin to process some of the difficult decisions that we may need to be making. You also spent some time working in Virginia. That's how we first met, including a few years at JLARC. We welcome you up to the podium if you can take a few minutes to review some of the information that is before us.
Thank you, Delegate and Senator, for that introduction. Can everyone hear me all right? All right, good morning. I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk about K-12 finance models with all of you today. As Delegate Rasul said in his introduction, I'm here to set kind of a national landscape on K-12 finance approaches. I'm a policy principal with Education Commission of the States, where I focused on K-12 funding systems. And for those of you not familiar with ECS, we are a national education policy organization. We've been serving all 50 states and DC for nearly 60 years, and we serve all state education leaders. So that includes legislators, governor's offices, higher education officials, departments of education. We do that by providing a variety of services, including nonpartisan information, personalized support, and opportunities for collaboration across state lines. One of the research products that we produce in a wide range of different policy areas are 50 state comparisons. And we'll do that in governance or accountability or school choice. And we updated our K-12 funding 50 state comparison earlier this year. In that comparison, we try to capture a lot of the key decision points state leaders have in designing their aid systems and see how every other state does that. That includes how they allocate their primary formula aid, whether they have a guaranteed base amount per student, how they count students for funding purposes, and if they have different supports for different student groups. So I won't go through that entire database. That would take a lot of time. You'd all get very sleepy and early in the day, but that is available on our website. So that hopefully will be a reference point for the subcommittee as you continue your work. I will provide some highlights on how Virginia compares. Looking at that database, Virginia is similar to other states in that it does direct supplemental resources for many of the common student groups. So that is for special education services, English learners, students from low-income backgrounds, small and sparse districts. Yet Virginia is different than most other states in how that aid gets allocated. In our most recent 50 state, we identified Virginia as being one of just 9 states that use what we classify as a resource-based approach for allocating aid to districts. In these models, the state guarantees a base level of resources, typically staffing positions in statute and policy regulations. These are the standards of quality that all of you are very familiar with, and then estimates the costs for having those in schools and splits the costs with local divisions. Some of the positives of this type of a framework for allocating aid is that it can help ensure that local districts have sufficient resources if the cost estimates are accurate. That's an important aspect to funding a system that way. And I know that you all have received an update from the Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission that have some suggestions around improving accuracy of that model. But if those are accurate, then you can ensure that all of the divisions in your state have the sufficient resources to meet targeted class sizes or have reading specialists or have mental health supports or whatever the state priorities are that you all determine. But there are negatives to that approach. And that is, why it's one of 9 states and not one of 49 states that use this method. First is that it limits local flexibility and can be a bit prescriptive. That's because district leaders have to meet the needs that are defined in statute and regulations rather than determining those needs locally. Similarly, the formulas themselves can be quite complex, as I'm sure you all are very aware, because there's so many inputs that have to be defined and prescribed, and can make it very difficult for the public to understand and district leaders to know how much funds to expect going forward. And finally, it can be difficult to differentiate funding for different student groups. It's possible, you all have done that with English learners recently, but it is more challenging than with other finance models. So because of these challenges, many states have actually shifted to using student-based approaches for allocating aid to districts. In our 50 state, we identified 35 states and DC that use this model. In these models, the state guarantees a base level of funding rather than resources per student, and districts receive a base dollar amount that goes to every student in the state. Some states may have a couple base amounts depending on grade level, but largely just one base amount goes to every student in the state, and then they can differentiate funding based on unique student needs by multiplying that by a weight or multiplier. Some of the common groups that states will differentiate is for English learners, students with a disability, students from low-income backgrounds, career and technical education, small and sparse districts, and gifted and talented are a few of the common areas that states will have a weighted funding for. In the past 5 years, 5 states have overhauled their funding formulas, and each of them has adopted a student-based approach. Nevada in 2019 replaced their 54-year-old formula with the pupil-centered plan, and in that process, they consolidated more than 80 categorical grants into one student-based formula. Maryland in 2020 adopted Blueprint for Maryland's Future, where they revised a lot of their weights, added a concentrated poverty weight. And then in 2022, Tennessee adopted the Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement Act, or TISA, which they went transition from the staffing resource-based approach to a student-based one. And then just this year, Colorado and Mississippi have adopted new student-based models where they've shifted a lot of their funding from separate programs into their primary student-based formula. And so some of the reasons why these models are attractive are, one, transparency. There's one dollar amount per student. There's clearly defined weights. The public, district leaders can have a clear understanding of how much funds are coming to their district and why those funds are coming to that district. In terms of equity, it's very easy to just have a simple multiplier that goes by that base dollar amount to adjust funding based on student needs. And then in terms of local autonomy and flexibility, districts have a lot greater latitude in determining how those funds are spent. But with that, there are challenges, and that is kind of intuitive based on what I've described, is that states have less oversight of spending decisions. So that can create concerns if districts are not using dollars effectively, then that can have drawbacks. States may create additional financial reporting requirements. Tennessee did that as part of adopting TISA, so that they're getting data on spending decisions at the state and the school level to make sure that funds are being allocated effectively within the district and as intended by the formula. So that is kind of one of the big trends that we've seen at ECS, but there are other trends that I want to briefly touch upon. That also includes changes to teacher compensation. There's been continued movement in increasing teacher salaries. You all in Virginia have been part of that trend of doing across the board teacher compensation increases. But in addition to that, states have been enacting minimum teacher salaries. We saw in 2023, Arkansas, Iowa, Tennessee, and Utah establish new minimum teacher salaries. This year, Missouri and South Dakota both enacted legislation increasing their teacher salaries to $40,000 and $45,000 as a minimum. And they've also set it up so that it can increase over time with inflationary changes that are capped at certain levels, so that those minimum salaries are not fixed. The other area where there's been a lot of state action is around how states count students for funding purposes. During the pandemic, states that used attendance rather than enrollment to fund students transitioned to enrollment, given the wide fluctuations that was happening. That was California and Idaho that used attendance. And just this year, Missouri has switched to now a combination of both enrollment and attendance in counting their students for funding purposes. And the other part of that equation has been a lot of districts saw declining enrollment during the pandemic and are projected to in the future. And so states have developed policies to try to assist those districts as they transition to a different level of student population, whether that is blending enrollment counts over more years so that the impact is not so immediate, or creating types of stabilization programs to provide additional supplemental aid to districts that need those services. So I think I'm getting close to my time. So I just want to wrap up by saying that as an organization, we do not advocate for any particular policy approach or direction that Virginia may choose to go, whether that is making improvements to the standards of quality, or whether that is looking into a broader conversation about reform in the state. We're happy to engage with all of you in whatever way the subcommittee chooses to go. We will be releasing a K-12 finance toolkit that we are providing to states as a technical assistant guide to help identify your priorities and design a funding formula based on those priorities that we'll be releasing early next year. And I'm happy to engage and see if it has appropriate application here in Virginia. So with that, I'll wrap it up. And I want to thank the Hunt Institute so much for having me, and the Joint Subcommittee for having me join you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. If you wouldn't mind, if we just have a couple of minutes for questions. If anyone has any pressing question around funding formula, our approach, the Joint Subcommittee's work, we're happy to answer a question either through Chris, from the chair, or myself.
Okay.
Delegate Locker.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Duncombe, for this report. Is there any, do you have any tables where you're comparing Maryland, Tennessee, Colorado? So you've mentioned many states. Do you have some visual that we could see how they compare?
Yes, thank you for that question. Yeah, we have a PowerPoint slide deck that breaks down a comparison of all the states that have recently adopted student funding formulas and shows what weights they've landed on, what student groups they're supporting. And so I'm happy to provide those PowerPoint slides to members of the committee as you continue your work.
Thank you. Delegate Willett.
Thank you, Delegate Rasool. Actually, question back to the Joint Subcommittee. First, a comment. Thank you so much for what you guys are doing. Absolutely critical issue for the state. I was on another education panel last night, and this was certainly the topic of the day in terms of where we're going to go with this. So given the enormity of taking this on, and you mentioned already that your work's going to continue into next year, what would be, is there a reasonable timetable yet in terms of when we actually could get to a new formula?
Thank you, Delegate Willett. I think to answer it more objectively, what we'll do is ask Chris to opine. As we know that there are the states that he's talked about recently, all of them have been a multi-year process, some a little bit quicker than others. But so the question is, on average, Chris, what are we seeing, and what does that spread look like?
I think Tennessee is the outlier, but they did it in 1 year. They had strong leadership from the governor and the Department of Education, but the conversation had been going on for a while prior to that. That kind of built up the appetite for making that transition. So while it happened fairly fast there was kind of a groundswell prior to that to make that transition happen. In other states, they follow a process that's pretty similar and mirrored what you all have done so far. They'll set up some sort of a body, a task force, a legislative committee that will have an opportunity to discuss, hear from experts, hear from the public, hear to review kind of what are the key issues they want to tack on. They have a series of recommendations. Those recommendations then inform the development of legislation that gets enacted. That can take the task force or bodies can be there for 2 years, for 4 years. And they may result in legislation, they may not. There's a lot of variety that occurs. But the other element that you already have is that most of these bodies also have some sort of outside report that looks at the overall adequacy of the formula and makes recommendations along that. So you do have the existence of that report. It is focused on making improvements to the existing structure, but it does talk about broader change as well. So I think you have a lot of the ingredients already, but that usually takes a few years, I would say.
Thank you. Delegate Simons.
Do you have any observations on what helps this process to move smoothly in some of the other states that have done funding reform?
Yeah, and there's first is to have a very clear champion that is kind of spearheading the initiative and is invested in seeing a successful product and is willing to work with a broad range of folks to have get across that finish line. Because when you're dealing with a funding formula, this is a fraught conversation. Everyone has stakes. So you need to have a dedicated champion that is willing to work with a lot of parties. Second, it's really helpful as you're going through the process of designing the formula to have broad engagement opportunities. Tennessee had 18 different subcommittees that had meetings. All of those meetings were public and had opportunities for public engagement. It's a lot of work, but it builds trust, it builds transparency, and helps folks know what is being debated on rather than it being kind of a surprise that comes to them during legislative session. And then kind of finally, the last element, to be completely candid, is for the state to be in a positive economic position, because whenever there is a large overhaul of a funding formula, typically it requires an investment from the state to ensure that there's more winners than losers. And most states will adopt some type of a hold harmless policy. Those usually last 3 to 4 years and can phase down so that no districts are immediate losers in that equation. So I think those 3 elements are really important.
Thank you, Chris. And to those points, number one, on the transparency through the chairwoman's leadership around the first meeting, we had approximately a 2-week public comment period with dozens of comments coming in. Ahead of the next meeting, we will have both before and after a public comment period. So we'll continue heading down that path. And we've also realize the importance of whatever happens in the future, a hold harmless period is probably a wise thing to consider.
And we've also included comments from stakeholders as part of the process. Anyone who feels the need to become involved and engaged in the process have an opportunity to provide us with their comments.
Question from Delegate Coiner.
And looking at the landscape across the country and folks who've had formulas in place for a really long time, like we have, I think one of the things that's daunting, and wondering from your experience, those who did it best, if you start focusing on the dollars needed first, we often set aside best decisions for policy because it just seems unfathomable. You can't fund it all. So states that separated out what the formula should really look like for what's best for kids and teachers, what does that look like? And then agreeing on that in a landscape of working on what should it really look like, and then having a separate conversation about the path to full funding. Have you seen success rates best when those are separated? Have folks been able to do that together in states that look like ours, right? It's different when you say you have everybody who's on the same team and on the same page. in an atmosphere where we need bipartisan support, which is different than some other states, right? Their landscape, sometimes their internal issues on their inside or create their own problems, what that's looked like across the country.
Thank you for that question, Delegate. I think that's a really interesting note. A lot of the states that have done this type of a transition, Tennessee and Nevada, they started with a kind of a set list of priorities that they all agreed upon, and then tried to translate that into designing the model, and then landed on how they could, what the base amount was going to be, what the weights were going to be. And many of the states that, when they determine what is the appropriate level of the base amount or the weights, realize that they don't have the financial availability to see that in year one of the formula. So some states like Colorado, in their enacting of their legislation, set a 6-year phase-in period to reach their desired goal. And I that's, those phase-in periods can be longer or shorter. And New York's ended up being over 15 years before they were 100% funding their new formula. So they can be quite long. And I don't think you should set a goal that you don't intend to reach. But looking at ways to phase up to fully funding a new formula is a strategy that some states have used.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you for the questions from the legislators. If we can give Chris a round of applause. Thank you. And now we'll transition to our next segment with Senator Locke. We'll be giving some opening remarks.
Thank you. We are now moving to a session on expanding access to higher education through Pell Grants. So I want to welcome everyone to this particular session. And we can have you guys go on up. So today I'm glad to introduce our next session regarding Pell Grants. As you all know, this conversation is instrumental in ensuring that higher education is affordable to students and families who most stand to benefit from the opportunities higher education can afford. Expanding access to higher education through Pell Grants is important, and here are some key facts to consider as we begin this conversation. Pell Grant recipients and low-income students are an often underserved population in higher education. Because of this, Virginia appropriated $25 million in 2023-2024 to fund proposals from state public higher education institutions to address the enrollment and retention of impacted students. The State Council of Higher Education identified initiatives at 15 public colleges and universities in the state, allocating approximately $24.4 million for the programs over a period of 4 years. Clearly, this topic is important, and I want to thank the Hunt Institute for bringing together such wonderful experts to lead us in this next discussion. With that, I'll hand it over to our moderator for this session, Dr. Tanya Garcia, who serves as the Vice President of the Institute for College and Success. So Dr. Garcia, it is now yours.
Thank you kindly, Senator Locke. It's such a pleasure to be here and to moderate this session with all of you. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to set the stage with what we know about the Pell Grant. Excuse me. So the Pell Grant program is the federal government's foundational investment in college affordability. Since its creation in 1972, the federal program has provided need-based grant aid to over 80 million students and of low and moderate incomes to help them achieve the dream of a college degree. The current maximum Pell Grant covers the lowest share, however, of college costs in the program's history Right now, students who receive the maximum Pell Grant are eligible to receive $7,395 to support their education. But at its peak, only 3 years after it was first created in 1975, the maximum Pell Grant covered more than 75% of the cost of attending a four-year public college. The current maximum award covers just 29% of that cost. The program has not kept pace with the rising cost of college, and for decades, the federal government and states have underinvested in students and public institutions. A little bit about public colleges and who they enroll. They enroll more than 3/4 of all undergraduate students, including 81% of students of color. Yet state support has been declining for decades and was battered during the Great Recession. Even before the pandemic, state support had not returned to the pre-Great Recession levels. Declining state funding doesn't just mean that it doesn't just equate into higher costs for students. It can also lead to decreased instructional spending, fewer course offerings, larger class sizes, and cuts in student services, which can really hamper a student's ability to succeed. Pell Grants are extremely well targeted to students with very high financial need. 88% of Pell recipients come from families with incomes at or below $40,000 a year. And 46% of recipients come from families with incomes at or below $15,000. That's 15,000 per year. Pell Grants are particularly important for students of color. They serve 60% of Black or African American students, 50% of Hispanic or Latino students, 45% of American Indian or Alaska Native students, and nearly 40% of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander students. All of these students rely on the Pell Grant to attend and complete college. Let's get to some of the results. Pell Grant recipients are already more than twice as likely to have student loans given how far the Pell Grant enables students to afford a post-secondary education. Nearly 7 out of 10 Pell Grant recipients who graduated from four-year colleges have student loans, and their average debt is about $2,069 more than non-Pell graduates. TICAS is exploring what a new federal-state partnership for higher education can do to establish front-end affordability. And by that, what we mean is that we've removed the need for the most financially vulnerable students and state residents to take out student loans to finance their post-secondary journeys. According to the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association, there is broad bipartisan appeal to focus on those with the least financial means. With that, I'm delighted to share the stage with Major General Cedric Wins of the Virginia Military Institute, President Tiffany Franks of Averett University, and President Brett Danilowitz of Radford University. Major General Wins, let's begin with you. Because I've been tasked as moderator, I am going to mention how much time we each have for all of these questions, just so we can stay on time. So in about 5 minutes, Major General, please describe how the VMI utilizes the resources at its disposal to ensure that cadets know about and are able to access financial opportunities like Pell Grants.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. And first, I'd like to just say to the folks of the Hunt Institute, thank you for inviting and including BMI in this conversation, as well as to the members of the legislature. It's not often that the small college down in Lexington, Virginia gets the opportunity to talk about our unique experience for our cadets. And so I'm thankful for this opportunity. To your question, I would say that the first thing for VMI when it comes to taking advantage of recruiting young men and women who can take advantage of the affordability through the resources that are provided, like through the Pell Grant, it starts with the awareness. And so we are very intentional about making sure that our recruiters, and we use a whole host of different recruiters in the form of not only our admissions staff, but our NCAA coaches, as well as a number of our alumni who conduct outreach not only within the Commonwealth, but across the nation to recruit folks. We want to make sure that they are fully educated on how we can communicate to students, families, the affordability of attendance at a school like VMI. And we think that's important, number one, because particularly for those students that are Pell eligible, we know that an educational experience at Virginia Military Institute can change the trajectory of their lives, put them in a position where if they are the first in their family to go to college, if they are of limited means and it's tough to find the resources to go to college, we make sure that they understand the availability of those resources that are available to them and how we work extra hard to help cover the gap through some of the additional resources that we provide. And so awareness is the first key component of what we do to make sure that in the conduct of the outreach, reaching counselors, reaching the families, that they are aware. The second thing we do is we have a very strong recruitment effort that brings our candidates to post. And when we do that, we want to be able to set them down and, number one, show them the strength of our academic program, show them the value of the education at VMI, but also to have very good discussions with them about the finances that are available. And so we meet 100% of the demonstrated need of Virginia students that are eligible. And the way we do that is we cover the gap that's not being covered by Pell, covered by state finances. And so if a young person is applying to VMI and it starts obviously with the FAFSA when they fill out the FAFSA form. The cost of attendance at VMI, we subtract that student aid index from the cost of attendance. And that difference is usually picked up by VMI for those students that have that demonstrated need in the form of either the state money, a small loan, and then VMI covers the gap with its institutional-based financial need. So for example, if a student, in-state student, is paying about $33,000, that's the total cost of attendance at the institute. And if their SAI indicates that they're demonstrated that $2,000, for example, is what should be covered with the finances coming from the family, then VMI will pick up that balance, roughly about $31,000. And so it's awareness. It is making sure that folks understand the value proposition of attending VMI. It's about making sure that they understand how those resources are available and educating them on how to take advantage of those resources.
Thank you so much, Major General. All right, President Danilowitz and Franks, the next question is for you, and each of you have 5 minutes for this question. So what additional support services do your institutions provide to help Pell Grant recipients succeed academically and financially?
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. And again, to the legislators present and the Hunt Institute, thank you for this opportunity to speak on our most vulnerable students in the state and the benefit of the Pell Grant to them. So I'm going to take this in 2 parts. First of all, on the financial part, Radford University is not the biggest university in the state. It is not the one with the highest tuition. We do not have the largest endowment, but we were the first to make the commitment as a public institution that students from families that make $100,000 or less will not pay a penny of tuition at Radford University. That is reliant upon Pell. And as Dr. Garcia said, that covers about, 29% of total costs at an institution, but it doesn't cover all of tuition. State aid also helps, but we've budgeted specifically at the institution to make sure that we can fill the gap to cover the full tuition of students who do have that income. So it's important not just to take the Pell Grant and put it in front of students, but to say, hey, college is affordable. We're making this purposefully an accessible route for you and leveraging the Pell dollars that are available. I want to thank, as Senator Locke had mentioned, the legislature and the governor signed off on a budget that included money for SHEV to support Pell students. And what I want to do is talk you through just very briefly the 2 grants that we received from SHEV to support the success of Pell students. You can think of these grants as the ability for us now to try to pilot things to see if they're going to be effective. So we took identified best practices at other universities nationally, and we're using this money to try these to see if they're going to be effective at Radford University. The first one is we have hired a series of undergraduate students as peer mentors to our Pell students. And what these students do is they actually make sure that our Pell students are timely in their application for aid. They actually help them find on-campus jobs. And they are the ones that keep track of the big deadlines for the students and make sure they're getting them done. Life is busy at a university. Many of our students that are on Pell are also first gen, and these individuals are going to help those students stay on track time-wise to be successful. We have hired 4 student success coaches who are actually trained social workers, and they're going to manage all of our Pell students in a case management scenario. They're assigned students, and what will happen is the Pell students go to that individual for any support they need. So all universities have advising, we have career counseling, we have a lot of different ways for students to have contact, but it's all different people, different places. Our Pell students now have a single point of contact, and that is really important for them to know where to go. Undergraduate research is one of the things that is shown to be the most successful for retaining students at a university. So with the SHEV grant, we are now starting a series of students as freshman researchers. They will get paid for 4 semesters to conduct research with a faculty member. And although I'm not a person that places bets, if I could go to Vegas and put odds, those students are very likely to be retained at 100%. Again, it's a pilot here at our institution. And the last one is from SHEV. We have up to $1,000 that we can use per Pell student to help cover costs that they can't find another mechanism for covering. All 4 of those are high impact practices. Elsewhere, we have to see if they fit the culture and place of Radford University. And then if they do, look to how to create permanence through those.
Well, good morning. And again, let me add my words of appreciation to everyone here and for the opportunity to share from Averett University and really on behalf of all of Virginia's private colleges. Just a little bit of context in terms of Averett. When we look at our student body, we are serving nearly 45% of our undergraduates are Pell recipients. So it gives you a context, obviously, that it's woven throughout the DNA of our student body, that we are very focused on our students in our lowest income levels. And then across our 28 Virginia private colleges, the average percentage of Pell eligible students is 43%. So Averett is certainly not uncommon, but some of the specific things we do to support our students, both academically and financially, it really does begin right in the summer as students are joining us. We do very customized outreach from both advisors, from upper class peer mentors, And then we move right into those developmental and pre-college kinds of experiences, what we call bridge programs. We know that our lowest income students are most academically at risk. So really investing in that bridge program that helps students start developing those college-ready skills, that helps them acclimate to college life has been very effective for us. Then we move into required orientations for our students that really focuses on both academic and non-academic support, and importantly, that one-on-one time with advisors. At Averett, one of the major areas of focus we have is on what we call the early alert system. We refer to that as our Averett Cares team. And this is a team that meets weekly that monitors our, almost 700 students that are receiving Pell Grants, watching for students that miss class, submit work that's not what we would deem as where it needs to be, or if they're missing deadlines, or if there are just other reasons that cause concern. That then leads to a variety of kinds of interventions that we can make. That we have found that embedding supplemental support in our college level gateway courses has been very effective for us. That includes hosting study groups for our students and tutoring sessions that are aligned with those college level gateway courses. Now, some of our Virginia private colleges have moved to delivering courses in block schedules because that adds to the predictability for our students, which I think that is also being determined to be very effective. We also, in our first year programs, embed financial literacy. We know how critical that is. The peer mentoring, which has been referred to, has been something very important at Averett. And I know, Dr. Garcia, you asked us to also speak to the kinds of financial outreach we are doing. And so just a few examples there. Averett invests its own resources and emergency funds for students. We have an alarming number of students today with food insecurity. So having, food pantries, clothing pantries, so that we're helping students get that professional wardrobe for their first interviews, their first jobs. Institutionalizing curricular policies that put our students on a path to that degree most efficiently has been critical. Offering credit for college level, what we would call work-based learning experiences. That's been another strategy that we have used. So those are some of the examples, Dr. Garcia, both academically and financially, that we've employed.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to take a little prerogative here and just let you know that all of these examples of how they're supporting their students, their most financially vulnerable students, are proven practices that really help today's students. And today's students are really different from the populations of students that we've served in the past. Many come with basic needs insecurities. If they're the first in their family to go to college, they don't have the same navigational supports that other students bring. And, what I really loved about your response, Major General, was about the whole campus approach. Everyone is involved in supporting the student, the NCAA coaches, the admissions staff, and other professionals on your campus. That's really important, that it not fall on just one type of student support professional. President Danilowitz, you really highlighted the importance of embedding high impact practices and the ability to experiment with different approaches to serving your students in this pilot fashion through the dollars that the legislature provided to Chev for distribution. That is a really key, practice that many institutions that I've come across are engaging in. And last but not least, President Averett, we know that the vast majority of nonprofit independent institutions do serve low-income students and are not that is not as well known as I learned that in when I was a state higher education executive officer in the state of Pennsylvania. And these are all just characteristics that not only define students attending independent institutions, but also public institutions. And so the mentoring, the tutoring, the peer supports, and the block schedules, those are all mechanisms that can be used to support today's students who may be parenting while they're learning, who may be working while they're learning, and who may have outside financial responsibilities of some kind or another that really need their attention, and they're also choosing to enroll in college, which is amazing in and of itself. So thank you all for your thoughtful responses to that. All right. So let's see. So we get to the question that I have been really eager to hear your responses to. So what specific state level policy changes or enhancements would you recommend to improve access to Pell Grants for low-income students? And what role does the state level need-based financial aid play in ensuring that students persist through higher education and earn a degree? Who would like to begin?
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. So from a state perspective, the Honorable Kirk Cox talked a little bit last night about work-based learning and paid internships. That is helpful without question. There have been grants offered through Chev to provide those opportunities, and we're now providing students through these grants up to $5,000 to provide them a paid internship or an underpaid internship to cover costs and also travel costs. Anything that helps us map how a student can put together their annual costs of attendance is really helpful, and a paid internship is part of that. And it also leads to gainful employment later on. And with those internships in the state, it also keeps our graduates in the state. So there is a whole lot of wins that comes through that. The more that we are able to provide wraparound supports for our students, the more helpful it is. And the funding through the legislature has provided Radford University the opportunity to pilot things which we believe will be effective, but that does not make them permanent. Some of those we may be able to change our own budget to make permanent. Again, as the state is able to provide some of those services for these students, it's helpful. And just like at Averett, we are 43% Pell at Radford University. Our newest freshman class is 54% Pell. So it is a significant number of our students. So in every classroom, and it doesn't matter for the sports team, et cetera, about half of our students are Pell eligible. So it becomes kind of a need for all of us to behave in ways that support these students. And I will say the other item, which I do believe is helpful and actionable, is there has become a narrative that it is legislature against higher ed. And honestly, we need to work together to provide ways to show students how affordable higher education can be. I'll just use a brief example. The G3 program in community colleges, fantastic, right? I'm going to say those are probably underutilized when we hear from Chancellor Dore. Students can get their two-year degree, in essence, for free, right? Continue at Radford University for those same students, pay no tuition. That's very affordable. We can work together to communicate how affordable higher education is in Virginia, but we've got to do it together. And I think that would be really, really helpful for us to do.
Few thoughts. We know that investment in need-based aid isn't just about individual students. We know it's about the state's long-term economic health. So a few thoughts. We know early intervention and awareness is key, as we spoke about earlier. So might there be ways that we could look at state level consistency, if you will, in terms of early awareness strategies for financial aid? I think the key there is thinking about it consistently across all sectors. Another thought might be, might we think about how to incentivize schools to support Pell Grant recipients, meaning offering financial incentives or grants to institutions, regardless of sector, that enroll a high percentage of Pell Grant recipients and who graduate them. I think that's the important piece, not only enroll, but graduate. Another thought could be, would we consider a state-funded program, again, sector neutral, that matches or supplements federal Pell Grants? I think of, here we are, Averett. We may be private, but we're serving the public good. And doing everything that we can to make certain we keep our students right in Southern Virginia, taking on those jobs and supplying the workforce needs of our region. So those would be a few thoughts.
So I think the first thing I would comment on is just how valuable this Chev Pell Grant initiative has been. And certainly I believe that as it is constructed as a 4-year program, it's being considered somewhat as a pilot. But I will tell you that for us, it could not have come at a better time, because as I became the superintendent at VMI, I recognized that where we were in terms of our admittance of Pell eligible students was not satisfactory. We were down in the bottom of the public colleges in terms of Pell eligible students that were getting an opportunity to come to a school like VMI. And so that wasn't satisfactory to me. We were obviously looking at ways to improve upon that. We certainly won't be as high as some of our public and private institutions, but I knew we could do better. And so that initiative has allowed us to put in place various tools to allow us to be more efficient and effective in what we do. Our ability to use new software tools, to get on the Common App, to update and provide for all students, but particularly our Pell eligible students, the ability to see our campus through a virtual tour before they have the ability, or if they don't have the ability to visit campus, our ability to fund their participation in what we have as a summer transition program, to make sure that they can get acclimated over the summer months prior to coming to VMI, because we want them to be successful. We want them to understand not only the academic challenges, but we want them to understand the physical demands, the military life, that whole experience that they're going to encounter. And we know that among these Pell eligible students, there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of quality. And because we're a military college and we promote the idea of service, we know that there are a lot of young people who can go and serve both in their communities. They can serve in the military, and they can serve across the nation. And so that has been very helpful for us. And the flexibility of that program has been extremely helpful for us to try some things, and then to recognize that a number of the initiatives that we built into the package of the program will work and are working for us, but also to recognize that a couple of them didn't work as intended, and to be able to vector or to adjust and course correct so that they will work. And so on the topic of flexibility, I would suggest as a recommendation that we take a look at some of the additional administrative burden on some of the other financial aid award programs. And so there's a couple that are out there And sometimes it might lend itself to confusion for families in terms of how to apply for them, how to apply them, and get those resources. And so I would recommend that be taken a look at. The second thing I would reinforce, particularly for us again, because of the number of young men and women that we send off to serve in the uniformed services, is to ensure that we can fully support the VMS DEP program. Certainly we want to, and we know the commitment of the legislature to honor the commitment of our veterans, and particularly those that are disabled. And so we think that program in and of itself will do a lot, not only for a lot of other kids, but certainly those that are Pell eligible that may have a family member who has served, and affords them the opportunity to come to college and to get a college experience. I think flexibility is the key. And certainly we're seeing flexibility in the program that exists right now for Pell eligible students. It's benefited us. In the last year, we've gone from about 18% Pell eligible students to 21%. And we're going to continue to work hard to identify those top talented young people that are finding challenges to go to college, so that they have the opportunity, and any additional flexibility that can be given in those programs would be much appreciated.
Thanks to all of you for your excellent responses. Here are some of the things that jumped out at me while I was listening to them. The first is really tied to what President Franks mentioned about these are all of these efforts are going to go towards creating a very talented economy and workforce for the Commonwealth. And that, putting one of my former hats on as a researcher at the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce, we know that increasingly the path into the middle class begins with education beyond high school. And that is something that should influence the level of state and local and federal support for such efforts. And so part of where I really think that, what President Danilowitz mentioned about reducing the silos between high school and, two-year sector and four-year sector and the workforce, that is something very much within the purview of what state legislators can encourage in terms of how interagency cooperation and just state actors can work together to really smooth these pathways that are going to prepare young people and the existing workforce for the changes that we know are coming at both the occupational level and at the industry level. So those are some of the things that jumped out at me. I really thought that Major General's point about the reducing of administrative burdens, that is also an area where state laws and state regulations can certainly be improved, because some of the things that we do research on at TICAS has to do with all of the hurdles that we're asking our lowest income state residents and students to prove over and over again that they are financially needy. There are some areas there that states have been exploring in terms of, if you had access to lunch through the free and reduced price lunch program, then you can automatically assume that when they graduate from high school, they're still low income, and what can be done on that end to not have students have to prove over and over again that they are of limited means. So I am happy to report that we are 4 minutes early to begin the open discussion with our wonderful state legislators in the room. And I am delighted to now turn it over to Senator Hashmi for the next portion of this agenda.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. Thank you for moderating this panel, and thank you to all of our panelists. Certainly provided a great deal of information for us to think about. And I will now open the floor for any questions from our legislators. Senator Favola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, presenters. You really have done a wonderful job explaining the value of Pell and your commitment to mentoring the students and ensuring they graduate. It's been very inspiring. So thank you for your work. My question is, so many students that would probably qualify for Pell may not realize they would qualify, and they're, of course, still in high school, and they might be reluctant to even apply to college because certainly they feel that their income or their parents' household income is not sufficient to pay for the cost of a college education, and they're deterred very early in their career. So are you making efforts to reach out to high school students and some naturally underserved populations to talk to them about the Pell Grant and the opportunities that do exist?
I would just share that in our region of Southern Virginia, we are very aggressive in working with all of our high schools to make certain that we are educating about the path to college, not just to Averett University, but how higher education is possible for them. I mean, we've got our financial aid team. And so we're boots on the ground in our area, in our region's high schools, trying to raise awareness about that very issue, because so many students do not see it as possible. So absolutely.
And Senator, I'd like to add, a lot of us participate in group regional workshops, right, for students to come in, but not everybody goes to those. And I will say that our community college partners in general have a deeper connection into their communities in high schools than the universities do. Okay, so what we are trying to do for Southwest Virginia, you're all probably excited about November 5th. For some strange reason, one way or another. Well, I'm excited about November 6th, okay? Because on November 6th, we're signing off on a partnership with the 8 community colleges in Southwest Virginia on the Tartan Transfer Program. It is mimicking the partnership between Nova Community College and George Mason University. We're doing that for the whole Southwest. And part of that is we are going to be developing a brochure with each of those community colleges on affordability, so they can help and continue to go into the high schools and middle schools to show the map. So before people are seniors, they're actually thinking, oh, I not only can I succeed in classes, I can afford going there. So it's new, but we have to be very proactive in that area.
The only thing I'd add, Senator, is certainly the boots on the ground approach is what brings about that first entry across the Commonwealth, so that young people know about the availability and the affordability of college. For us, obviously, we utilize those tools that I talked about. We have a presence in college recruiting fairs. We do have relationships with a number of high schools and high school counselors to be able to talk to them about identifying young men and women, regardless of their background or their financial status, and about the opportunity for them to go to college. And we do use our alumni very strong throughout the entire Commonwealth through what we call new recruiting fairs. Where oftentimes our alumni in various different professions may know a family or may know an individual and suggest to the young man or young woman's family to just take a look, introduce them to VMI and introduce them to the opportunity of VMI. And so we utilize all of those. We also have kind of reorganized ourselves where we have now within the construct of my command, a strategic enrollment management directorate, which is headed up by one of my institute officials, Colonel Shannon Eskin over there. And we do a lot to make sure that by fusing the efforts as opposed to kind of siloing the efforts of recruitment, financial aid, a marketing component, and then talking about retention with those students, that we let them know not only is VMI affordable, not only is it not out of reach for Pell eligible students, but that when we get you on post, when we get you on our campus, we're going to work with you with a tremendous amount of resources to help you from the start all the way to the finish, because we want to see you get to the finish line. We know that that's going to change the trajectory of your life and perhaps your family's life.
Thank you. And we have Delegate Coiner followed by Delegate Converse Fowler.
Thank you. I think when we look at, my view has changed in the secondary and moving on to college phases. My kids have gotten older, right? So I spent a lot of time focused on pre-K and literacy. And now I have 2 high schoolers and a full-time community college student in my house. And so my lens, once again, is changing. So one of the things I wonder, we have a graduation requirement to take a personal finance and economics class in Virginia to graduate, but you can take it anytime you want during high school. But, there might be 1% of 9th and 10th graders that are focused on where they're going when they leave high school. Let's just be honest, right? Like, they're figuring out friends still in sports and the high school experience. And when you get into that junior and senior year, it's when you start thinking about, oh my goodness, what am I thinking about doing next? And, I had no idea as a parent, I think I'm a pretty engaged parent, about the choices you make in that senior year. And then the choices you make, let's say if community college is your path and you want to go on to a 4-year, there really isn't a place that's everybody gets the same information. If you're able with your work schedule to show up to a parent night where they could do a one-night thing in our school division where you show up without financial aid. But how we make it more uniform as part of those years where you're transitioning out. So, just looking at how complicated FAFSA is, the application, and any kind of grants you're looking to get, is there a better way through our junior and senior years of high school to have real life transition moments for everybody, not just the parents who are able to show up? Like, I missed the meeting they had because I was at a kid's sporting event, right? Like, that's life for parents today. Or I was working in the General Assembly when another session was going on. But every parent has those stories that if it's a one-time shot and you don't get the information. So how do you see in our high schools how we incorporate more information from higher ed at all different levels into students having the information they need, whether they have a parent who's able to help them or not, know all the items they need to fill out applications, all the things that they need to be collecting? Have you seen that work really well in certain places?
So, ma'am, I would say that those partnerships between admission staffs at colleges and student counselors at high schools, if there's a gap to be bridged, it's with them. And whether or not the communication needs to be so that high school counselors understand that that's a needed resource. For us, we have used some nonprofits, and we've used some folks that kind of fill that gap right now, that go out and touch these young people. They have relationships with high school counselors, and they are filling that void to talk to them about how to step through filling out the FAFSA, how to apply for the gap, how to do all of those things. And so I think that if there's a stronger relationship that can be built with colleges and student counselors, or with colleges and the folks that put on these college recruiting fairs, where perhaps at a college recruiting fair, you had a session that talked about how to fill out the FAFSA, how to apply for financial aid, and so on and so forth, that might help. We use contract sources, nonprofits that kind of specialize in this area because they recognize that as a gap, and they're using that to fill it.
I'm going to have the name of this wrong, but it's the Virginia College Assistance Program out of UVA. Again, I've got the name of the program wrong, but they use the AmeriCorps program, and I know at many high schools we have one of those AmeriCorps volunteers, and those volunteers are trained in all ways to help educate about accessing college, accessing financial aid. So I know in our region, we work with those counselors to make certain we're supporting them and their education efforts. Our financial aid team is working with those counselors. So I think, so much of this is about how we're just very intentional in this kind of outreach, because as you say, the financial aid process is overwhelming, to say the least. So that is one way that we have found that we are working to reach every high school in our region.
And Delegate Quinn, I'd just like to add, I've been to many of those parent advising nights, and the 7 parents maybe this night, they're sparse because people are busy. There was a bit of a change in Southwest Virginia. I'm going to say Carillion started leading this effort, Carillion Clinic, but they created the Blue Ridge Partnership, and is really publics, privates working together with businesses to show affordable pathways into health education specifically. But they are assigning ambassadors that are going into high schools. These are college students going back into high schools, talking to students, talking to parents. So they're trying to expand the network of people, because when we just rely on universities or community colleges, again, it could be the trust isn't there. It could be just that the people aren't there. So they're really expanding that network and trying to make it a public-private partnership about that same type of communication. It is only a couple of years in, but the results seem to be promising so far. And I know they're starting to replicate that in other areas of the state.
When one of the first reports that I worked on at the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce brought to my attention the Virginia Education Wizard. I don't know if that is well known by those of you in the room, but it is a really comprehensive student resource that enables them to explore careers and serves over 2.5 million users each year. So it helps them take assessments. It's a partnership between the Virginia Community College System and the Virginia Department of Education. And that collaboration, it's not just for students going to the VCCS institutions. It packages financial aid information in terms of what students are eligible for as Virginia residents. And I try to tout it as much as I can. I'm wondering if part of the information in that portal could get to some of your questions about how to increase financial literacy. I understand that the wizard is designed for as early as middle school students on up through adult learners, including members of the military and on and on. And so that is just one idea for in response to your question.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. Thank you for highlighting the Virginia Wizard. And I think that is a useful tool that we can certainly make sure all of our legislators have direct access to, so that they can take a look at it and also share with their constituents. And you're right that it is developed by the VCCS and has been under use, I think, for almost 2 decades at this point. So thank you for highlighting that. We have a question from Delegate Converse Fowler and then Delegate Lawfer. And anybody else want to get in queue, please raise your hand, but we'll hear from Delegate Converse Fowler.
Thank you. My question was, well, first of all, I'd like to thank those that put the Pell Grant in place, because when I went to school in the early 2000s, that's the only way I went to school. So I appreciate the Pell Grants that I received. At the time, it felt like it was an automated process where it was like, fill in your FAFSA, fill in your paperwork. Has anything changed from because I noticed the data goes back from 2008, so I'm trying to understand the complexities and the problems that we're having. Would you say anything has changed since, I mean, that's a long time ago, I know, over 20 years, but it just seemed a lot easier. And I'm wondering, like, the process was already in place, and I'm not sure if anything changed with the FAFSA or where we're having the struggle, so we can come up with solutions, if anybody has.
Thank you for that question. Part of the advocacy around the new FAFSA form, which is known as the Better FAFSA, is that there are many questions that were removed from the FAFSA form. There is a new, instead of the expected family contribution, that has been replaced by the student aid index, which is more accurate in determining a student and a family's need. And we know that there are a lot of issues in the rollout of the new FAFSA form, and part of it has to do with the updating of really old technology that used to be used for the FAFSA. And so on the ticas.org website, we have a variety of resources to learn more about the changes to the FAFSA. And so some of the issues have been, detrimental for sure to many families across the nation, but the new form is qualitatively better than the previous forms.
Dr. Garcia hit the key point, the new form, but I will say there's also been a change through time. You mentioned data in the past, and Dr. Garcia in her introduction indicated that the Pell Grant used to cover 3/4 of costs. Now it's 29%. So families can't apply for the Pell and know how they're going to cover costs. So I'd say the legislature has been very generous the last numerous years, providing state-based aid for students to attend. It helps, but remember, those programs, the Virginia Commonwealth Award, will only cover up to tuition and fees. The VGAP Award will cover up to tuition, fees, and books. I didn't mention housing. I didn't mention board. I didn't mention transportation. I didn't mention, there's a kind of a long list that starts showing up. So I'm going to say it used to be easier in that the Pell gave you a plan. The Pell no longer provides you a plan, but it's a piece of the puzzle. So just support in general has gotten more complicated.
And just to follow up, if I may, are we not utilizing, like, I know we're trying to encourage, I read or I heard about encouraging how we can encourage students to fill out the FAFSA. Are we not utilizing the funds, or are we trying to make sure just that they're utilizing the funds that we have?
Many states are leaving Pell dollars on the table because of the way in which the FAFSA form is being, basically any outreach has to be expanded. And so every state is leaving Pell dollars on the table. I can say that without any doubt. And so it really comes to working not only with state agencies, but also community-based organizations, the churches and other religious groups that are really part of the fabric of many of the communities where they're already influential people in those communities that could be part of the outreach efforts of, noting the availability of federal aid and how that, really paves the pathway for post-secondary education.
Thank you. And we'll hear from Delegate Lawfer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I also want to just say thank you for this informative discussion. And just to Dr. Frank's mention of the program, it's called GRASP. That is the program that you were talking about. But what I wanted to ask, or just maybe this is a comment and then I have a question. I've been on the Social Services Board for many years of my county. And what we started implementing pre-COVID was if any client came in and filled out a form, they automatically filled out all the other things. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe this is how we can talk about this in the high school level. Having, some of our college counselors or counselors just be aware that if they already have this reduced lunch fee, just automatically get that information. Just an idea. But then the other thing I wanted to go back to was Dr. Garcia's comment about the silos of the high school community college. And I was a teacher and on the school board. And this is something I'm really curious about, if there's best practices, because we know a lot of students enter into community college and need remedial reading and math. And I had often talked with our own community college about how can we vertically align the curriculum and have this, what is expected at the community college or even a four-year university. I'm going to make this plan with the math department of the high schools, or do you know of any programs that are out there trying to do this? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. I've actually written about desiloization. I'll have to look that up and share it with organizers. So when I was a Deputy Secretary and Commissioner for Higher Education in Pennsylvania, I was attached at the hip to the Deputy Secretary for Workforce Development in the Department of Labor and Industry. And one of the things that we engaged in together was really working together to see how workforce funding could be used, for example, to support apprenticeships in teaching. That was one example that many states are actually looking into doing. That's the first. The second, she led efforts where the job centers across the Commonwealth, the people who were, working at those centers were also trained in helping people to fill out the FAFSA form. That is something that I haven't seen a lot across states, and that's certainly one area that I would recommend in terms of desiloization. I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
Delegate Lawfer, the Blue Ridge Partnership that I mentioned earlier, part of that is their goal, because they want to align the high school curriculum so the student can streamline the courses they're taking, so they know exactly what they need to take in community college. They can take the right dual enrollment courses, so there's no lost credit, and it's the fastest track. Now, remember, that is specific to health services, health science programs, but there's such a need in those areas. They're trying to make that effort. I'm going to suggest that's the best model that I know of, but they started just a few years ago and it's still rolling out, but they're getting there. So it's a seamless communication.
You helped me remember what I was going to say. So one of the things, I was a state higher education executive in Pennsylvania during the pandemic. And so one of the things that has changed the way I think about remedial and developmental education has to do with the significant amount of learning loss that occurred. And so I'm still, mulling over, how do we deal with the learning loss, especially from the class of 2020 and on, that was really affected by the pandemic, and what role can two-year colleges and four-year colleges play in the provision of co-requisite supports where the students are automatically enrolled in college credit-bearing courses while receiving the wraparound supports, tutoring, mentoring, and the like that really help them to save and use their precious financial aid dollars to go towards degree and certificate completion and the like.
Well, I want to thank each and every one of you for those comments and just wanted to add, okay, Senator Locke has a question.
I'm sorry. It's not a question. It's just a comment. I just wanted to make a clarification for people that we are not talking about federal Pell money that's flowing through Chev, that this is money that the General Assembly has allocated through Chev to fund these initiatives that these institutions are using for recruitment purposes for Pell eligible students to help them do these programs that they've talked about. So we just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you, Senator Locke. Very important clarification. And I wanted to just add my personal comments. You know, one of the criticisms that's often leveled against higher education institutions is that our colleges and universities are bloated by with unnecessary staff or administrators and so forth. And I think hearing from each of you, as diverse as your institutions are, one thing that is crystal clear is that these extra resources, which are coming in and extra human resources, increased number of staff, are providing very essential wraparound services, mentoring support, all of these creative ways in which you're providing support to students and helping them succeed. And so when we're taking a look at these programs that are being put into place, we also need to be evaluating the outcomes, the increased levels of success, graduation, retention, that extra staffing, extra administrators are translating into students who are able to succeed in college and then go on to appropriate jobs and careers. And so I think that needs to be part of our evaluation and conversation as we go forward. So thank you very much for each of your comments. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Garcia to close us out.
Thank you so much, Senator Hashmi. Well, it is my distinct pleasure to have been a part of this panel. Thank you again to the Hunt Institute and to Virginia leaders for inviting us to be at this event. And so I would love to turn it over to Delegate Coiner, who will be leading the next panel.
Thank you. Can we give them all a big round of applause and a thank you? I'm excited to transition us into our next segment on adult learners and their post-secondary experience. Again, I'm Carrie, and I represent the 75th House District in the Virginia House of Delegates, and it's a privilege to be here with so many colleagues at the Hunt Institute's Education Summit. Before we begin our final session, I think it would be helpful to provide some facts about what we know on adult learners in this space. Adult learners make up 37% of university undergraduate students across the country. Further, about 25% of these adult learners are raising children, and 58% are working while enrolled in college. A top priority for adult learners is to find a flexible academic program relevant to their chosen career field. We've been struggling over this adult learner space within the childcare space, right? So many of our parents who want to further their education, we know that finding quality, affordable childcare is a key component to their education attainment as well. So as we kick off our last session of the summit, let's keep all of these numbers and important figures in mind as an indication of how critical it is that we support this group. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Waverly Wizenett, the Deputy Director of Higher Education at the Hunt Institute, who will be leading this discussion. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And again, let's just kind of recenter what we were discussing in this session. So we will be talking about adult learners and post-secondary attainment and the importance of wraparound services and making sure that adult learners were coming as whole people to post-secondary schools. We know that they have children, they often have full-time jobs, and so we are making sure that we are offering those services. We're going to hear from some incredible people about what institutions here in Virginia are doing. So let me go ahead and begin with President Paula Pando. So what would you share with our legislators about the adult learners you serve and current efforts to improve the educational experience of adult learners enrolled at Reynolds?
Is this on? Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. It is the afternoon. Oh, still morning. Good morning, everyone. As we all know, more and more adults are returning to college, particularly those who never attempted a post-secondary credential, and many who started a program and never completed. They far outnumber our K-12 pipeline and graduates, and this is a population that's increasingly coming back to school in high numbers. And what we know about them is they have very full lives. They've got financial obligations, many have family obligations, some caring for parents and for children, transportation issues, and so forth. And so what we've found, there are 6 really important pieces to successfully support and improve the educational experience for adult learners. Number 1 is something that we learned very much so during the pandemic, and that's the importance of flexibility in instruction. We can no longer wait for working adults to figure it out, drive, find a parking spot for a class that begins at 6 o'clock. And so greater flexibility, not only where courses are offered, how they're offered in a hybrid setting, in an online setting, asynchronous, et cetera. So that's really very important. And that includes robust academic supports for our adult learners. We want our adult learners to know that while they've been working, what they've done in life actually counts. And so prior learning assessments are very important. If somebody's been working in an office for many years, can we just test you out that you know how to use a computer and an Excel program and not make you sit through another intro to computer and computing classes? So ensuring that their learning on the job counts towards what they're hoping to achieve. Those wraparound services are very important to adults. We think a lot about mental health when it comes to our K-12 students, but our adults are also struggling with a lot. The world is a lot right now. Many are struggling financially, again, family obligations. I would also something very important for our adult learners and something we're focusing on greatly, not just at Reynolds Community College, but in the Virginia Community College system, is really developing those learning environments that are contemporary to the field. Our adult learners are not here to hang out for a while and discover themselves. They need to see a pathway to what they want to complete. And that also involves ensuring that their learning environments, whether they're healthcare students, welding students, electricity students, that they're in the program and they can see and feel what that workplace will look like as they work toward a credential. And finally, I would say very important for our adult learners is to really focus on what happens after they graduate. Those post-secondary outcomes. Our goalpost used to be completion. If they've completed, we've done our job. That is no longer the goalpost. Did they complete something of value? Were they employed? Did they earn a living wage? Did they transfer with full faith and credits, not just to the university of their choice, but in the program? I just ran into a student walking in here and he recognized me. A student that graduated from Reynolds. He's in his middle 50s, graduated from Reynolds this spring and waved me down and said, Dr. Pando, I am a junior electrical engineering major here at VCU. And so ensuring that we're working with our primary transfer partners so that the transfer is not just to the college, but to the program of study. And so those post completion outcomes, was the job there? Were the wages there? Did they have the skills necessary to succeed? And if they're transferring, are they transferring into their program of study? And do we have that pathway laid out for them clearly so they know how long it will take, how much it will cost, and what they can expect on the other side? Those are questions that come up for our adult learners all the time, the return on investment of precious time. And it's our job to ensure we have those support systems to get them through their program.
Thank you so much, President Pando. I want to reiterate those 6 important pieces that Dr. Pando spoke about. And I think this is something that's very important to us as we're looking at what adult learners need, not only in the community college system, but especially for those who are then moving on when they're 50 to VCU to become those electrical engineers. So thank you for sharing that as well. So our next question is for Dr. Crane. So Dr. Crane, could you give us an overview of the North Carolina Community College system's approach to supporting adult learners and then across the Commonwealth, as well as the successes and challenges of those programs?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I'll just take a brief moment or two, excuse me, to talk about the North Carolina context and how that led us to the particular approach that we've taken. Our state is aging. Our median age is 39.4 now, which means that we've got plenty of working age adults, but we do not have a large number of high school students that we're expecting to come through the pipeline. Second, in our state, demand for workers outstrips supply, and that is not projected to change anytime in the near future. So we've got this situation where there's growing demand, but lack of supply. And if you don't work with them already, I'd highly recommend connecting with the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. They do amazing research on community colleges, and one of their labor economists, Laura Ulrich, has spoken to our board multiple times and shared great information. Third, we know that good jobs, anything paying more than $40,000 a year, are increasingly requiring post-secondary education. And our colleagues at Georgetown expect that by 2031, 85% of good jobs in North Carolina will require some education beyond high school. And finally, we have a state attainment goal, 2 million by 2030. And when we looked closely at the demographics in our state, we have 380,000 adults with some college but no credential. And this population is what we honed in on to really try and figure out how we could get more of them to come back and complete. So what we did was steal a great plan from another state. Tennessee Reconnect was the model that we used, and North Carolina Reconnect has 4 main components. One, direct outreach to students. We partnered with a group called Inside Track. They're a national nonprofit organization, and we give them data sets, and they reach out to these students on behalf of the colleges, check in with them, see where they are, give them information about what it'll take for them to come back and complete a degree. Second, a dedicated marketing campaign called Better Skills, Better Jobs. I think this is a theme that's come up already. Adults are not interested in sitting on a quad and playing Frisbee. Adults want to figure out how quickly they can improve their earnings to better support their families. Third, each college that participated in this program received grant funding to figure out and solve whatever the issue was at their institution. That could be hiring additional staff. It could be building an adult learner center. It could be building cohorts of adult learning students, but they were able to have some flexible funding to meet their needs. And then finally, we worked very closely with these colleges, 5 at a time in cohorts, and we brought their IT staff together, their research staff together, their presidents together to share ideas, build a little bit of competition, honestly, to see who is doing best to really generate more focus and attention on these students. What's a little bit unique is this was not led by our state agency. This was led by a philanthropy, the John M. Belk Endowment, based in Charlotte, but they brought together the Community College System Office, the University of North Carolina, a group called My Future NC that manages our state educational attainment goal, and a research partner at NC State University. And just to give you a bit of information about what the impact has been, we've been doing this for 4 years now. With the 20 colleges that we've engaged, they've reached out to 44,000 adult learners. They've contacted 12,000. They've re-enrolled 2,700, and nearly 1,000 have completed. And this is less than half of our 58 colleges that we worked with. So now that we have this underway, the state is starting to step in and think about what are the policy tools that we have at our disposal. President Pando mentioned one, prior learning assessment, I think is absolutely critical. There's a solid research base that if you give adult learners credit for what they've already done, it increases their enrollment and completion rate, which in turn recoups the funding that institutions think they might have lost almost immediately because they take more credits and they pursue all the way through to completion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crane. So again, just to reiterate, credentialing is something that matters for adult learners. We also know that wraparound services are extremely important so that our full-time adult students have those extra supports. We also heard that contemporary learning environments are also important for our adult learners. The transfer process for adult learners is a significant piece to help them achieve post-secondary attainment. We also heard that adult learning centers can also be a success on campuses for this population. And then that last piece with that prior learning assessment and making sure that they're receiving credit for the work life experience they have, as well as that other knowledge base that they have grown as they've moved into their current status in their working environment. So thank you so much for sharing that, both of you. So now I have a question for both of our resource experts. As you reflect on the services you provide to your adult learners, what would you share with legislators about the unique needs and challenges adult learners face? President Pando, I'll begin with you.
Sure. Our Virginia Community College system has a very aggressive and audacious goal in our Accelerate Opportunity statewide plan of 300,000 credentials of value by 2030. We can't just wave a magic wand. We have to really understand the student populations that we're tapping into. Time management and competing responsibilities, I would put at the very, very top, followed by a close second with financial strain as a barrier for many of our adult learners coming back to college. There's a lot of financial aid available through G3, through Fast Forward, wonderful programs in the state, but there is still the cost of living. If you're a university student, your housing, your meal plan, all of that is kind of packaged in your aid package. And so those financial strains are very real. Another piece I would say is confidence. For so many of our adult learners, they're coming in thinking, I'm going to be the oldest person in the class. I'm 30 years behind. And that's a very real feeling, that lack of confidence that they are college material, or perhaps it's too late and they're going to be in class with 17-year-olds who are going to be looking at, you know, the 50, 55-year-old. I would also say career relevance is very important to our adult learners. At age 40, 50, 60, our oldest graduate last year was 72. They're coming to us with a very clear purpose, whether it's career advancement in their current career choice or completely changing careers, where we see people with baccalaureates at 50 years old saying, I always wanted to be a nurse, and now I'm going to nursing school. And so really understanding that fear or lack of confidence, understanding the fiscal and financial constraints that are real for working families, and those competing responsibilities are very, very real for our adult learners. So if we're going to achieve those audacious goals for our Commonwealth, the win-win-win for the learner, for the employers who need talent, and for creating a vibrant community where more people are participating in the economy, win-win-win, we've got to be very aware of the challenges and the potential barriers that the largest growing number of students, percentage-wise, are coming to our doors. It's knowing, I always say at our college, we've got to be ready for the student who comes to our door, not the ones we imagined would come to our doors. Who are they? And understanding their needs.
I'll pick up on some of these same themes here. And when we looked at the adult learners in our state, we realized that 62% of them were in what we call workforce and continuing education programs. So these are They're not receiving financial aid. They're not on their way to completing a degree. Many of them already have a bachelor's degree. They're coming back to reskill or recareer. And when we looked at some of the institutional approaches that have been taken by North Carolina community colleges, there are three things that really stand out as critical components for engaging adult learners. First, adult learners are extremely busy. You've heard this already today. I know just trying to find time to go to the post office is challenging enough for me. I'm not trying to go to college at the same time. And that is true universally for adult learners. And so one of the strategies colleges have taken is keeping their offices open longer so that you can go get financial aid information at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock at night. You can go to the registrar at that time instead of having everything close at 4:30. A second college, Durham Tech, what they realized was that the Christmas holidays is a time where people are often reflecting on what they want to do next in their life, and colleges are not available. They were completely closed for those 10 days. You could not get a hold of anyone. And so they realized that, you know what, let's hire somebody to work during that period of time and answer questions that students have. They got 175 students to enroll because they stayed open for 10 days during Christmas in that spring semester. One of the second issues to highlight about adult learners, and President Pando mentioned this, is community. Adult learners are worried about coming back to college and not seeing their peers, not feeling prepared if they've been out of a classroom for a long time. And so one of the ways that some of our colleges have addressed this, Pitt Community College in particular, is to create an adult learning center. This is a place where they have adult-specific advisors. They can meet peers, colleagues, and connect and recognize that they are not the only people on campus in this situation. And finally, finances, but a little bit different than the way President Pando's talking about it. So community college is functionally free in North Carolina. We don't advertise it that way, but if your family makes less than $80,000 a year, your tuition and fees are covered at all of our public institutions. However, students who have dropped out or stopped out may have unpaid tuition, may have never returned a book to the library, may have a parking ticket, whatever these additional fees are. And one of our colleges, Central Carolina Community College, looked at these unpaid fees, and they found in most cases it was around $50 that was keeping a student from re-enrolling. And they were able to pay for that out of their foundation. As policymakers, large colleges have larger foundations, small colleges have smaller foundations. So this is not a universally accessible strategy based on institutional resources alone, but partnering with philanthropy or the state to address this is a strategy that can help bring folks back, and the institutions will recoup that investment almost immediately by the tuition fees that the students are paying.
If I could just add one more thing, and I realize because I turn to my children all the time when this device doesn't work, the double click is two fast clicks, not click, is the digital divide and technology. For many of our adult learners, it's no longer go to the class and there's the sage on the stage. You have to open your Canvas and do all of your work through Navigate and communicate in high tech ways. And so again, it's introducing the technology use at the college level. And I would say a big strategy for us has been understands that the first time someone gets it wrong, it may confirm the worst they believe about themselves. I am not college material. And so when working with an adult learner to be able to say, okay, we're going to do this. Here's where everyone trips up. Just be prepared. Where we know people struggle through certain parts of our bureaucracies, just be prepared. Here's where a lot of people struggle. So if you're having an issue, call me. I get the calls all the time. It's different than I can't figure this out. Okay, let me help you. It's a very different way of communicating, but one that affirms that you're not in the wrong place. It affirms that you should be here. It affirms you can do the work. And a lot of people get tripped up on this. Lowers the temperature immediately. And I think those language nuances are very important.
And I also think that ties back to what Dr. Crane was talking about with community.
Yeah.
And so there's obvious through lines here with both responses. So we know that the attainment goals by 2030 with our adult learners, time management and financial strain are two distinct barriers because our adult learners have full-time lives outside of their education. Adult learners are grappling with this confidence that we just talked about, not just do I belong, but also technology might seem scary. And so how do we lower those barriers and help support them in inventive ways and in ways that build a community and make them feel seen as well as feel comfortable coming to any of the resources at your schools. We also heard that we want to have career relevance. That's something that's very important for our adult learners. So we want to always be sure that we're ready for the students who show up, not the students that we're wishing to show up at the door. I also heard that workforce continuing education is key when we're talking about adult learners for reskilling and credentialing. So again, we might have folks who are coming to these community colleges who have their bachelor's degrees, but they're looking again to reskill and recredential and upskill themselves. Adult learners, again, are busy. So we've heard that time and time again. We heard it last night. We've heard it previously. Wraparound services are significant. And the universal truth here for adult learners, again, they're busy, but offering those flexible times is just one way to provide a resource to them so they can have access. And then I also wrote down the community. So I think I have said community about 5 times. And I think, so again, I'll say it one more time, community is important here for our adult learners. And then finances. So having that affordability in creating a barrier-less finance to their post-secondary attainment is key as well. And then I also wanted to highlight one thing that we are doing at Central Carolina and North Carolina is they're using their foundation money to remove a barrier. So $50 was a barrier for many of their adult learners to re-enroll and matriculate through their community college system. So in order to remove that barrier, the community college used foundation money to wipe away that $50 or less barrier. So I wanted to highlight that as well.
Would you mind if I had one more?
Absolutely.
So in addition to the $50 barrier, sometimes students are no longer making satisfactory academic progress. They may have withdrawn or failed a class, and so they can't get aid again until their GPA is back up. So what some colleges have done is give students 6 credits or 9 credits to take for free. That gives them the ability to succeed, increase their GPA, increase their academic success, and then receive financial aid again.
Thank you. And I would be remiss not to thank you both one more time before I hand the floor over to Delegate Rasul. So let me go ahead and pass the floor to you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate our presenters. We even allowed one to come from the Tar Heel state. So don't forget about us when we're crossing the border as well. As we're waiting on questions from our legislators, feel free to let me know if you'd like to ask a question. My question is the delineation and the difference practically between someone approaching you all either as a final stop or on the path to a 4-year degree as an adult learner in whether or not they obtain their GED or needing to kind of go back and finish up the high school diploma. So the question is what's the difference for an adult learner, the value that they get in finishing the GED versus the high school diploma?
Did you want to? Okay. Well, the GED or the high school diploma is, in terms of what we do, is very important in terms of a person's ability to access federal financial aid. That's one of the locks that the GED or the diploma, and I would say one size doesn't fit all. I think the most important thing that we can do is be very clear about the path forward, how long it takes, how much it will cost, the job at the end of that journey, whether it's a 15-week journey, a 2-week journey, a 2-year journey, 4-year if you're going part-time, but to really understand what that map looks like, get them on that path as quickly as possible. Be very clear about that path in both a full and a part-time schedule so that if you're part-time, you know how long it's going to take. sequential cafeteria style does not work. It's been shown in all of the research that students can drown in choice. Now, our faculty aren't happy about that a lot, about eliminating some elective courses, and I understand, I'm a liberal arts gal. But the more focused the path is, the more likely the student will keep on that path and finish what they completed. How long it will take, the cost to the family, and then what those learning outcomes and those employers that we have a partner with. So I think the GED or the diploma for us is really a financial aid issue, at least in Virginia.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And I don't think we draw a meaningful distinction between whether a student has earned a GED or an adult high school diploma. What's important is making sure those students are able to go where they want to go next. And I think they are a very under-tapped student pipeline in North Carolina. We've been working on a statewide initiative to map some of our degree pathways better and to make sure that those pathways start with a GED or an adult high school diploma, not only coming directly from a high school or re-entering from a college. And when we looked at that population, particularly in our state, it also is a critical population to reducing some of the attainment gaps we have across the state. And by focusing on that population, we're able to not just create seamless transitions, but also make meaningful progress towards our state's attainment goal.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions from our legislators, Senator Boysko.
Thank you for your presentation today. Virginia has done a lot of work around people who have been incarcerated and who are returning back to their communities. And I'm wondering if you see an ability for us to actually have partnerships within the system of corrections while they're still behind bars, and then helping transition, providing educational opportunities for those individuals who are coming back home to join their communities.
Yeah, I think the short answer is absolutely. We do that in North Carolina. I worked in Oregon before coming to North Carolina, did the same thing. It's incredible what it does to reducing the recidivism rate if you're able to provide educational opportunities. It's not without its complexity. I know, particularly in correctional institutions in Oregon, I'm more familiar with that context. Sometimes there was limited access to computers or limited access to the internet. So sometimes teachers were coming in with paper books and working with folks to learn whatever skills they were working on in that way. A lot of it was GED and high school equivalency, which is a critical first step. But again, you need to get them the skills that they can actually get a job on the back end. And I think the other sort of note I would make is it's important to advise those individuals correctly so they're not earning a credential in a field where they won't actually be allowed to work afterwards. And so there's a lot that goes into it. It requires really close partnership with the Department of Corrections, but it is very doable and has a tremendous impact.
And Virginia is growing in that space through Second Chance Pell. And again, to just reiterate what my colleague has said, how important it is when we are in these programs in the prisons, and Reynolds Community College certainly is, that we're not preparing somebody for a field that they cannot get licensed for with a background check, where a felony, a conviction precludes, it just debars them from being able to enter that. And so again, it's that great care and attention to details. We all know the devil's in the details. And so being very realistic. One of our highest enrolled programs for people just leaving the system is our CDL program. We know there's a shortage in truck drivers, and just in a few short weeks, you are earning a living wage in an honest job. But there are other programs that we're teaching inside the system, even in sociology courses, people who want to come out and work in some sort of human services space, counseling young men and women so they don't follow the same trajectory they did.
Thank you. Vice Chair Simons.
Thank you all so much. This is for Dr. Pando. I keep hearing advising, I keep hearing support for students, wraparound services for students. And I remember one thing that really surprised me, when my daughter was at UVA, there were tons of counselors around her, tons of opportunities for support and advice. But when I talked to my local community college, they have many fewer of those counselors and those support people. So I kind of would like an update. What are we looking at here in community college land? What do you have? One counselor for every 500 students, every 300 students? Where are we and where do we need to be?
We are, candidly speaking, grossly understaffed. Our counselors are at 750 students per advisor. And we candidly speaking, again, Virginia's community colleges are in the bottom 23rd% in the country for FTE funding. Bottom 23rd in the country and the lowest funded institutions of higher education in the Commonwealth, serving the highest need populations. Only one of my 6 kids went to community college. All 5 got up. They went to their dorm, from their dorm in their pajamas, went to the cafeteria where breakfast was served to them. They went to class, they went to a club meeting, they went back to their room, maybe went to a party, did a little studying, wash, rinse, and repeat the next day. That is not the story of community college students. And so the high touch, it's not just high technology, but the high touch needed, we could double our advising capacity to help students get on that track, keep them on that track, and those support systems that are so necessary for so many of our students who are one emergency away from walking away from it all. One flat tire equals a missed shift at work. Missed shift means no pay that day. I still have to fix that tire because I have to get to work tomorrow. I can't afford the textbook they say I need to have for the class. You know what? I'm going to drop that class. I'm just dropping all my classes. And I refuse to believe that in our great country, we can't do better than that.
And if I could just add to that, I think we're in roughly the same position. In terms of a benchmark of where you would want to be, the City University of New York has a program called ASAP. It's been sort of the gold standard for wraparound services. They have a 150-to-1 student to advisor ratio, and that combined with a couple other components succeeds in doubling the graduation rates for the students who participate in it.
Thank you. Senator Favola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you're doing a great job in reaching out to non-traditional students and helping them enjoy the experience of going to college and realizing maybe a latent dream they always had. I'm just curious, have you explored instituting a mentor program for these students? So there's sort of always somebody they can talk to and I know they've got a different life experience than freshmen entering college at the traditional age. But in our more traditional model, the freshmen have a mentor and they, have a resident advisor and all that. So I'm just wondering if there's a lot of peer support there, either formal or informal for the non-traditional student.
Sure. At Reynolds, we have several mentoring programs for different swaths of our student population with very specific and very unique needs. For example, we have a Black male initiative at Reynolds with community leaders here for young African-American males, especially coming from city of Richmond. I always say you can't want what you don't see. What you don't know, how can you want that? And so we have specific mentoring programs. We also have communities of practice. So for example, our automotive technology folks, they have their own hub and they support one another. They hang out with the employers who are preparing to hire them in these high demand fields. We're about 2,400 automotive technicians short in the Richmond MSA in Central Virginia. And so I think that relevance of especially for the adult learner, that it has got to be connected with that end goal. They don't have time. They tell us, we say, oh, we'll get together. We'll get together on a Saturday. My kid plays soccer on Saturday. Okay, how about online in the evening while I'm working second shift to pay for school? And so it's really understanding the demands that they have on their lives. And maybe it's a Zoom room of support. So again, it's rethinking that face-to-face, which we valued so much. I went to college in the 80s. Everything was face-to-face. I can't imagine an online world, but more and more of our folks, now I'm comfortable having a family Zoom. Who knew? My family in New Jersey, we get together every week with a family Zoom. So we're becoming accustomed to that. But I think that's where we need to rethink, how do we gather community in this time for our adult learners who have so many demands on their life that optional is not an option for many.
Thank you. And just a note to our legislators, I know that the Hunt staff will mention this as well, but there is a survey that you can be sure before you leave that you'll take a look and please fill that out. Delegate Lawfer.
Yeah, I just want to say also thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the panel. And I'm really grateful to Ms. Pandow for talking about the finances. I live in the area of Piedmont, Virginia Community College, and we're constantly discussing the rate of, tuition. A lot of these community colleges have this dual enrollment program where many of them are not receiving any tuition for students that are high school students. In PVCC alone, a third of their students are dual enrollment, which means they have no tuition. So I think I really hope I'm on higher ed, and actually this is what we've been talking about, how to come up with more funds and think about utilizing the community colleges as the workforce development that they really are to communities. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Hashmi.
Thank you. And thank you all for the presentation. I was just appreciative, Dr. Crane, of the ways in which you pointed out that support resources are available to adult learners outside of traditional hours. And I think that's just such a critical step for us to all be thinking about. And I know that we've done that here in the VCCS as well in many of our institutions. But I wanted to explore a little bit further how we can make access to courses more flexible as well. We still continue to follow in large measure the traditional, but I think pretty outdated model of having 2 active semesters, fall and spring, kind of ease off for the summer, and then try to come back again and reinvigorate. That's not the model that works for adult learners. They want to be able to complete their coursework, achieve their credentials in quick measure, as you both pointed out. And we've started to put in flexibility, but I think we're still kind of trapped in that rigid structure that we've had historically. Are there any conversations going on either in the North Carolina system or Dr. Pandow in the VCCS to provide more flexibility, opportunities for continued coursework through the summer months and accelerate that pathway to degrees?
Thank you, Senator. So yes, absolutely. Not only are we no longer married to the 15 weeks in the fall, 15 weeks, take the summer off, come back. We are starting courses every 5 weeks at Reynolds in the credit side and every couple of weeks through the non-credit. But I think one place where we can accelerate and do more work as a system, and I know we are going there, is through competency-based education. So for example, if a course is a 15-week course and the first 3 weeks are mastering this concept, if I can master that concept in week 1, let me move to week 2, let me move to week 3. And I don't need to be here for the full 15 weeks. So I think what is changing is the concept of fixed time in a seat where the outcome is the variable to the time is less important and the outcome should be consistent. Competent. You've shown competency in the module and competency in the outcomes of the course. And I think many states are really going into this competency-based education, and it's certainly a conversation in Virginia. But I think those modalities are very important as well. Those high flex, maybe I can't show up to class tonight, but I can do it online. But next week I'm going to class. And again, offering year round. And we have seen tremendous growth in summer enrollments through our, what we call Take the Summer On campaign. Because we know if students can take 1 or 2 courses in the summer, they're more likely to return in the fall. And without that summer kind of fried brain, that they're actually continuing and can complete online on time.
I think those are great examples. A couple to mention from North Carolina. One, we've had several institutions start to transition to 8-week courses instead of 15-week courses. Students are able to make more progress. They have this momentum going, and that has increased persistence at the colleges that have been trying it. I will also say this is a space where our public institutions should learn from the for-profit institutions who are able to start every week, every other week. That level of flexibility is what is attractive to adult learners. We are not able to offer courses offering every week or 2. I think it just requires a scale that very few institutions have. Maricopa Community College in Arizona, they're able to start courses and programs every 2 or 3 weeks, but that's the exception rather than the rule. I would say the one other area of flexibility I'd call out is around healthcare. And this really grew out of the pandemic of how can you do clinicals virtually? Of course, you don't want your nurse doing all of their clinicals virtually, but can you increase the percentage enough that clinical spots are less of a bottleneck and you're able to have a more hybrid approach to your coursework?
For our final question, Delegate Coiner.
Thank you. This is for our friend from North Carolina. We have struggled with childcare, and we have a long wait list for families that we know 100% for a fact they qualify for childcare assistance under our Virginia subsidy program, but we don't have a slot available. So these are parents who are working or could be attaining their education, but they don't have childcare. So wondering in North Carolina if you all have done anything innovative in that space to encourage parents to go back and get education, and what you've done in that space. I know Reynolds is piloting some creative things as well, but just wondering from North Carolina what you've been able to do to address the childcare needs of your adult learners.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I wish I had a silver bullet answer to give you. I think it's a lot of different strategies that we try to piece this together. Some of our institutions have early childhood education on campus, and so they're able to provide childcare centers on campus. Some of them operating on pretty flexible hours and having drop-in opportunities. Those centers typically operate at a loss for the institutions, so it's not possible for all 58 to have those. There have been some examples of partnering with corporate or business partners who are in the community that also have childcare centers. So students are in a learn or earn program where they're taking some courses at the college and then they're working at the same time. Some of the business partners have provided childcare. But honestly, this is a challenge for us as well, and something that we struggle with. I think the last strategy I'll mention is actually training for faculty so that faculty get a better sense of the struggles that their students are experiencing and approach their adult learners with a little more empathy, whether that means bringing their students to class or whatever the case may be, just to sort of try and change the dynamic in the classroom a little bit.
Thank you. Before we turn it over to our co-chair, Senator Hashmi, to begin closing statements, we'll turn it back to our moderator to close us out.
Thank you so much. And I also want to thank all of the legislators for the wonderful questions we've received. And I appreciate your time in being mindful of our folks and asking some very thoughtful questions. And so let me just reiterate some key things, or at least one big thing I'd like to share back. Our adult learners in our community college system are one emergency away from leaving the system. So that one flat tire, that one thing that's going to go wrong, and it's a domino effect. So how can we, again, support them? And this is pretty much just saying exactly what President Pando had said. And so what are we doing to make sure that our adult learners have that success and through the level of flexibility we can offer them at the community college system? So thank you so much for those questions. And I'm going to turn it over to our president and CEO, Senator Hashmi. Just kidding. That is not what's on my paper, but that's okay. So Senator Hashmi, please.
Thank you. Let's have a round of applause for this wonderful discussion. Thank you again to each of you and for the insights that you have shared. So as we conclude this year's Virginia Education Summit, I want to take a moment to reflect on what we've accomplished together. You know, over these past 2 days, we've heard from some incredible experts. We've shared insights and engaged in critical conversations about the future of education in Virginia. I'm grateful to each of you for your active participation, your thoughtful contributions, and your dedication to improving education across our Commonwealth. The perspectives and the ideas that we've gathered will be invaluable as we head into our next legislative session. So our work here isn't finished. It's actually just beginning, as we have seen. And we leave the summit armed with good and new knowledge, but also with a clear sense of our responsibility that we have to translate these discussions into meaningful action. So whether it's addressing inequities, improving access, or strengthening our education system at every level, we each have a role to play. I want to thank you again, Dr. Siddiqui and the Hunt Institute for organizing this summit. I want to thank my co-chair, Delegate Rasool, for your partnership, and to my fellow legislators for your unwavering commitment to this important work. And finally, thank you to everyone who's contributed to making this event a success. I'm looking forward to continuing our work together as we strive to create a bright future for all of Virginia's students. Thank you. And I will turn it over to Delegate Rasool.
Thank you, Senator Hashmi. Thank you for your leadership and great work in helping to co-chair the 2024 Education Summit. Also, a thank you to the immediate past co-chair to my right, Delegate Coyner, who's been coaching me as well in my ear. So I can continue to improve as a co-chair. To the Hunt Institute and Dr. Siddiqui for your leadership in bringing us together. Look, the reality is that in difficult times where there are certainly polarizing conversations, it's important to be able to create spaces that allow us to address issues that may be difficult to talk about. And this neutral space helps us in a bipartisan way to brainstorm where can we find areas of agreement. And we're thankful to the Hunt Institute for offering that space as we go back to our districts, but also as we prepare for the upcoming General Assembly session. So thank you to you all. And without further ado, to offer final closing remarks, Dr. Javed Siddiqui.
All right, thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank all of you, all of the members for your attention, your listening, your learning, your grappling with heady issues these last couple of days. Spirited day yesterday, but you don't get through the muck without entering the ring. So I appreciate you all getting into it. The one thing I reflected on yesterday, I'm grateful I'm no longer a part of an administration that has to actively deal with this. And so I wish you the best Godspeed through the session, because it's going to be a fun one, I suspect. But I know the one thing for sure, it was very clear yesterday.